Hi, this is Leigh. You have a lot of options when it comes to focusing on the more advanced DSLR cameras, and the D300s is no exception. There are three focus modes on the front of the camera, and then three additional focus area modes on the back of the camera, and they all work together, but it can definitely get confusing. There are a lot of combinations, and there's room for each of the combinations, but like I said, it gets confusing. So in this video, I'm going to go through them all and let you know how it all fits together. On the front of the camera, you have your three focus modes. If you're looking at the front of your camera, it's to the right of your lens, and it's just a little dial that says M, S, and C. M is for manual, and manual is pretty obvious. You put it in manual, and you have to use your focus ring that's on your lens to focus the camera. In S, that stands for single servo. That means that when you half press the shutter release button, the camera's going to focus for you, and it's going to keep that focus as long as you have the shutter release button half pressed. And then continuous is C, continuous servo. That means that, like in single servo, you're going to half press the shutter release button and the camera will focus for you, but in continuous servo, if your subject moves a little bit, the camera's going to keep focusing for you. The way to have the camera stop focusing if you're in continuous servo is actually to press on the back of the camera the auto exposure lock, autofocus lock button. That will stop your continuous servo from continuing to focus, and it'll lock onto your focus and exposure. Now, like I said, you have to half press the shutter release button to get the camera to focus when you're in the two autofocus modes, the single servo and continuous servo. Or if you didn't want to half press the shutter release button, you have another option of actually pressing the autofocus on button. It's just AF on button. It's on the back of the camera. Once you've chosen your focus mode on the front of the camera, you turn your camera around to the back and look in the lower right-hand corner. Right by your info button and your live view button, you have your autofocus area selector, and it has three little icons that we're going to go through. From bottom to top, you have single point autofocus. That's just a little box, and that is where you manually choose where your focus point is going to be in the frame. In the middle, you have dynamic area autofocus. That is the same little box, but it has some dots around it. What that means is that, well, it's just a little bit smarter than single point autofocus. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then above that, which is a filled in box, you have auto area autofocus, and this is the smartest mode, and we'll talk about that as well. Let's start with single point autofocus first. When you are using single point autofocus and single servo autofocus, you're going to first choose where your focus area is going to be. To do that, you half press on the shutter release button, and you're going to see a box light up in your viewfinder. And then you can use your multi-selector right here to move that box around in your viewfinder to wherever you want it to be, and that's where your focus is going to be. If you're using single point autofocus with single servo autofocus, that's where your point's going to be, and it's not going to change. However, if you're using single point autofocus with continuous servo, you do have a little bit of leeway where the subject might be able to move forward and back and still be in focus. However, if they move side to side and they move outside of that box that you've chosen, they're going to be out of focus. Next, let's talk about dynamic area autofocus. That is the middle option on your autofocus area selector. I said that is smarter than single point autofocus, and that's sort of true. If you are in dynamic area autofocus while you're in single servo autofocus, dynamic area is really going to act like single point. You choose where the point is, and that's where your camera is going to focus. However, if you are in continuous servo and you have dynamic area autofocus selected, your camera really is smarter. If your subject moves slightly outside of that box that you've selected to be your area, your focus area, the camera's going to use the areas around that box that you've selected to still maintain a focus on your subject. There is an option for how many of those boxes the camera will use to figure out what focus it's going to use. It's in your custom settings menu. It's option A3. I happen to have mine set at the very smartest because why not? It is called 51 points 3D tracking, and the camera just pretty much is going to figure out where my subject is in the shot if it moves outside of my chosen box. The last autofocus area option is auto area, autofocus. It's the top option, it's the filled in box. That is where the camera is just going to figure out where your subject is, and that's what it's going to focus on. And it's pretty precise so far in my use of it. It's mostly going to choose whatever is closest to the camera, so keep that in mind when you're shooting. But whether or not you're in single servo or in continuous servo, your auto area autofocus is pretty much going to act the same way. Other than the fact that when you're in single servo and you look through the viewfinder and half press the shutter, you will see a bunch of boxes light up, and that's your auto area autofocus deciding where it's going to focus. But if you're in continuous servo, you just won't see the boxes. The basics of focusing are fairly similar on the higher end DSLR cameras, so even if you don't have a D300s, hopefully you've been able to learn something in this video. If you have any questions, please let me know.